morning. Good? Yes. Good audio. Cool. So I'm going to do something unconventional. You can call that. Let's see if it's working. How is everyone doing this morning? Good. You enjoyed the dinner yesterday? Yep. Did you mingle enough? Talking about measure, right? How do you measure if you mingled enough? Yeah? How many new people you get in your LinkedIn account yesterday night? You can count that. So as Ben said, can you see that? Yeah, great. So that is me. I like to define myself as an enthusiast pragmatist. What does that mean? Huh? But I have an inclination to empirical validation, which means I don't believe things work until we can see that they work. I don't really trust much the fact that some people tell me it worked in my company, must work in your company too. I always tend to be skeptical about silver bullets and everything which looks to be the ultimate final solution to every problem. And that way, I've been blessed and humbled to have the opportunity to start a couple of businesses in the past year, some of which are still running successfully, some other which just disappeared from the face of Earth and nobody ever will find them in Google, because one of those actually ended before Google started, so you won't find it anywhere close to that. In the process of growing organization and helping my organization, but actually with the work we are doing at Agile 42 and Cognitive Edge, also helping other organizations to grow, we started understanding and seeing there's a certain amount of recurring pattern, repeating pattern, which present themselves oftentimes, which have much to do with the organization itself, but also with how the market dynamics are changing in the past years. Are you familiar with Geoffrey Moore? Crossing the Chasm. Nice book. Every entrepreneur should read that. Especially because the idea of regular growth, of incremental growth, which gives us this nice bell curve, is actually a little bit flawed, especially when we look at the last years. And when we deal with disruptive innovation or new market, there is this thing called the chasm. And the chasm is basically that point in time where you switch from your early adopter innovators on the left side of the curve, which is a very small market percentage. And those guys, you know, the innovators are basically the one who believe in your idea, even if you have nothing in your hand yet, and they are willing to pay money to help you develop something that could become a product one day. Many startups, unfortunately, they kind of stop here and, well, we sold it to a couple of customers, it must be a good enough product, we are ready to go, right? And you stop challenging the fact that you probably didn't broaden enough your reach, you didn't broaden enough your capabilities to reach a wider market and actually really jump over the chasm and enter what is called the early majority phase. The early majority phase is the phase in which money and profit really comes in until we top it up here. We reach 50% market penetration, and normally, as we know, at that point in time, competition is growing, is harder, prices start to be put down, people come up with new things which force you to reduce your prices or compete more aggressively. And all of this, of course, drives the way our organization internally change. We are sensitive to changes happening on the market, and normally we adapt to those changes internally, organically, if we have the time. In fact, data show that the average market cycle duration in the past 30, 40 years has been between 10 to 15 years from conception of a new idea here to reaching the laggard phase down there. Yeah? 10 to 15 years give you the time to be maybe one of the first mover, come up with an implementation of a new idea, contributing to grow a market, and then before you know it, 3, 4, 5 years, you enter in the early majority, you start gaining market share, you need to broaden your portfolio because you can't live only on the back of a single horse. Why that? Because when we reach this point up here, then the profit starts to go down. And you can't think about what I'm doing next when you're up there because it's already too late. And In terms of go-to-market strategy, also what makes a big difference, and few people understand that, in terms also of how dynamic within your organization changes, when we are on the left side of the blue curve, we have a go-to-market strategy which is normally called sell-to-make. Sell-to-make means we are selling an idea, we are selling a vision, and we are trying to convince someone to pay us money so that we can build it. It's a little bit more what people tend to call a project type of business rather than a product type of business. But then you switch on the other side of the curve, and the go-to-market strategy changes to make to sell. We first need to have a product, otherwise people don't give us money. And that seems like a trivial distinction, but fundamentally, the attitude within your organization, the way you approach customers, the way you go to market, on the left side of the curve is all about fast feedback. It's all about learning and understanding very quickly what is needed, what we need to build, and how we need to build it. It doesn't matter the quality so much. It doesn't matter performance so much. You want to listen to the early adopters who have idea, they are using your product, they give you feedback. You want to transform that product as fast as you can because you want to hold on to them. You want to learn from them how to build the right thing. But when you move on the other side in the early majority, people expect your product is working. People expect your product is high quality, is performing, right? So here performance plays a role, definitely, and quality plays a role. And all of this in a moment in which your organization, either because got funding or because you are organically growing, needs to grow with the market, because if you don't, and your capability to deliver or execution excellence doesn't reach a certain level of competitiveness fast enough, then you are losing market share. And if you lose market share there, to regain market share on the other side in the late majority is going to be much more expensive because the market share are given. And taking away a 1% or a 2% market share from a competitor is a much more expensive exercise than being one of the first mover in the first place. Also, if we look at this part of the curve until we reach the early majority, 50% market share, what matters the most is effectiveness. As effectiveness, we mean the capability of the organization to actually deliver value fast to the market. It doesn't matter so much to be efficient or to be cost-effective most of the time, because in most markets we are dealing with today, to be honest, the cost of delay is the biggest cost we are dealing with. Arriving 2 weeks late, 3 weeks late, 5 weeks late in some business model is costing you a lot more than spending 2 weeks longer in developing, yeah, or investing in creating the product. On the other side, though, when we are moving to the late majority laggard phase, what matters the most is efficiency. And the reason is simple. Once we reach the 50% of the market and we reach the peak in terms of need satisfaction, of market maturity, of understanding of what needs to be done, at that moment in time, we don't have any more much variability on the market because the market has been understood, has been shaped, has been served with plenty of services and solutions already. And so the variability we are having in terms of market after this point is quite limited. And so when that movement starts to stabilize, it's much easier to focus on optimizing for efficiency, in making things automated, in making things more efficient and economically also more viable. And it's what we need, because when the prices go down here, the only way we can keep making profit is to be more efficient, to reduce our cost of delivery, right? Because gaining market share, as I mentioned before, is absolutely more expensive. But now we have a problem. If we look at the last statistics on many markets, this number here went down to the half. Many market cycles are very volatile, which means they start and finish within 5-year time. If they start and finish in 5-year time, we don't have anymore our natural time to grow the organization, and by the way, to completely shift the culture from an organization which was focusing primarily of being very autocratic and customer-oriented on this side, to an organization which needs to focus on building with quality and performance and grow functionality and value very, very quickly. We don't have any more years to cross the chasm. We probably have months. Right? And that's a big problem, because we need to actively tackle leadership, the way we lead the organization. We need to tackle directly our organization's design, and we need to tackle directly the way we deal with our own internal culture. So let me give you now an image on how all of this work from the inside-out perspective. So how do companies normally work? Ben's already gave us a quite good overview this morning. We have a vision, a purpose somewhere. We try to break down that purpose into multiple goals. We identify and measure on how we can measure those goals and know if we are moving in the right direction or not. But fundamentally, the whole story within the organization is based on this pyramid. And this pyramid shows us one thing, which is we need to produce results which are not coming from nowhere, but are generated by actions every day, every minute of every hour of every day. Someone in your company is making a decision and does something. Unfortunately, not everything people do ends up being a result. There is always some waste. Something we do doesn't bring anything. Fact of life. And we can spend as much as we want, and I am a naturally born agilist and a lean thinker since the 90s, and the scope of agile and lean is actually to make that pyramid thinner. This is what agile and lean help us doing all over the places for many years. But the point is, if the market becomes so volatile, and that vision, that purpose, keeps on shifting every 3, 4 years, 5 years, maybe even faster, what can we optimize for? We cannot just reduce waste and optimize processes if we need to keep on changing direction continuously. And so we learned over time that what is needed in this century or in this decade, because we are in the knowledge age, we are not anymore in the industrial age, that is over, right? The problem we are trying to solve are completely different. Is to react faster and adapt faster to market change is what we need to do. And in order to do that, we need to increase our organization resilience, the capability to learn very quickly and adapt very quickly to what happens on the market. But how do people make decisions in our organization? They make decisions based on their beliefs. And beliefs is not religion here. Yeah? Might be those values and principles that we heard about before, but still, when you hire a new person, how long does it take to that person to work with your organization to understand how you do things around here? Is that written anywhere? Do you actually write down your culture on paper? Are you one of those companies who writes values and principles, put it on a poster and hang it on the floor? Because that doesn't help much. Yeah? Especially when those values are detached from the narrative, the parable, the story of success and failure that are connected to the fact that those values exist on the wall. Because if you're not able to tell those stories to the people, they will just read words and interpret those words through their existing culture and value system, which might be different from what you want them to be. Does it make sense? So we need to guide people, we need to help people understand better what our values are. And we need to do that by guiding them through experience. But if we look at how most of the company work today, and I draw a line here in the middle, what we focus on the most is actually to manage the last mile. We put a lot of effort in trying to steer those actions and making sure people produce results. And we do that with a lot of energy, with a lot of intensity, and sometimes we realize there's actually so many escalation going on because what the organization is defined by at this level are all those structures, which are like processes and tools, roles description, responsibility, all those stuff are holding consistency within the organization at that level, right? The problem is, if there is high variability on the market and the amount of input coming in is not aligned with the structure of the organization we design, people need to escalate. They need to come to you, the founder or the manager or the VPs, whatever, and say, hey, what should I do about this? Because it doesn't fit into our processes. And if they have developed the sense of ownership that Ben was talking about this morning, they might react differently as opposed to someone who is just an employee and is just sitting around and doing what you tell them to do. Because the easiest thing to do is, I don't know, that's not my thing, never seen it before, we don't have a process for it, we don't have a rule, I just leave it on the table. And if that happens, you're actually accumulating delays in your organization. You have a huge amount of unmade decisions which are hidden on the table of someone which slows you down. Slow down the growth, slow down profitability, slow down a lot of things. We heard more and more talking about leadership in the past year, and the reason for that is that leadership works at a completely different level. Leadership is about coaching, mentoring people through the journey and the experience which is necessary to create the right beliefs so that might happen one day that eventually they are doing the right thing without us having to running after them and control everything they do every day. Yeah? It's quite logical, make a lot of sense. So why are you not doing that? Anybody has an answer to that? Why do you think companies are so busy in trying to manage the operations that they forget about the people? And that is one of the problems that we are seeing more and more in the last decade especially. There is a huge shift happening because if we look at traditional company, not so much startup, because startup have an advantage. As Ben said this morning, you start in 10 people, probably all in the same room, you talk all the same language, everybody knows everything about everything, and you can very quickly interchange and give each other an hand on how to move forward. And until you are 10, that works perfectly. The problem we have is when we go back here and we cross that chasm and we start to grow rapidly as an organization, either because we got an investment round or because we are profitable on ourselves, either way, one of the biggest mistakes we make when we cross that chasm is to start designing organization as empty boxes with nice labels, role description, and responsibility, and starting to hiring people to put in those boxes, which implicitly makes that organization incapable of operating until all the empty boxes are filled. And once the empty boxes are filled, we are dealing with people in those boxes who don't know anything about our organization culture. They've just been hired. And the risk is then we cross the chasm, and what made us successful in the first place, which was that feeling we had in 10, those values which were implicit, those stories of success and failure that we live together, that made us the company, are basically going diluted into water because this new guy coming in, which are maybe experienced manager, experienced leaders from other organizations, are basically completely unaware of. Yeah? So shifting to leadership means we take the responsibility as owner, as founder of the company, as old employee, to actually guide everybody else coming into the company through a journey of learning and learning our beliefs, what made us successful, what are the value, the principles, the stories of success and failure that we experience down here, which basically tell us this bottom part of the pyramid is exactly what we call organization culture. So the culture of an organization is something very measurable, very concrete, it's not fluffy. And we can measure it through the outcome that the culture produces. And the outcome that the culture produces are behaviors, which we can observe every day, are story of success and failure, are habits that develop within our organization, rituals, yeah, of many kinds. I bet any one of you can name or think about something you do in your company which is unique to your company and defines you. Yeah? A ritual, a specific ritual. You arrive in the morning in the office, what people do? They are very silent, they go pick a coffee, or there is an initial stand-up meeting naturally happening at the coffee machine in the morning where everybody aligns what we are going to do today, what is going to happen. All of these rituals have not been defined and have not been designed in any way. They just emerged because it was the most natural way for the people owning the business and understanding what was going on to actually come together, share the purpose again, and focus on what needed to be done. So the shift toward leadership is something which needs to happen at a certain point, which also means that we want more responsibility and more autonomy in our employees, in our workforce, in our colleagues, because then, if they have more autonomy, we can become more resilient as an organization. The thing up here, how we define our organigram and how we put structure in place, given the fact that the market changes very rapidly, is probably something which is going to last few months. If you look at all large organizations in the market today, they reorganize regularly, latest every 12 months. And they didn't do that 10 years ago. And the reason why they didn't do it 10 years ago is that because the market were more stable. So they designed a perfect machine to fulfill a certain purpose, and that machine kept on working long enough to create profit. And while the machine working, then you can focus on optimizing. But that only works if the market lasts long enough and you are at this side of the market curve. Then efficiency makes a difference. But if we are still growing market and things keep on changing, then we need to invest more on resilience, on reacting faster to changes, assimilating new idea, maybe even bootstrapping completely new things or pivoting in a completely different direction. There's also another point which can help organizations increase in their resilience, which is the idea of alignment versus coherence, right? Or both of them at the same time. When we talk about alignment, oftentimes we tend to overstretch the need for alignment beyond the purpose and the strategy, and we tend to overstretch that need for alignment sometimes really on plans or roadmap even, right? So we make a plan, we put down some dates when we need to achieve something so we can have measurability of some kind, and then we put down our KPIs and we want to make sure that by those dates certain KPIs are met, yeah? And we want everyone to align behind that path, yeah? The problem is if that vision, that goals, are far away in the future. And today, with current market volatility, 2 years in the future is far away, even in very conservative market spaces, because technology innovation, as you know, is much faster than yearly cycle already. There's a lot of things coming up. Through globalization, there's a lot of repurposing and exaptation. I mean, technology which have been built to do something end up being used to do something entirely different that nobody was thinking about before. So what happens is that if we push too much for alignment, we are not taking care of all those people who are working within our organization, but come from different places with different experiences, and they are basically all forced to come and join our unique plan. What if that plan is wrong? What if the moment in time where we defined those goals, they were relevant, but in the meanwhile, those goals already changed. And we already put everybody on the same path, and everybody with the eye blinds try to focus and go through execution, execution, execution. Yeah? If that happens, we become blind to a lot of business opportunity which might lay on the side and could be a good help for our growing organization in terms of cash flow, in terms of maybe achieving even valuable information on how to steer our business. We won't see these things because they are not on our path to success, which we are committed to achieve. Yeah? This is what alignment, extreme alignment, can bring. On the other side, we have another options, which probably allow an organization to stay more resilient, which is what we call coherence. And coherence is interesting because coherence means that everyone still wants to move in the same direction because that direction is transparently made available, is something you talk about regularly, is something that is shared also in terms of strategy, but is not a plan we ask people to comply to. It's an ongoing conversation about how can we reach that goal that we all want to reach, what are the relevant elements in the strategy today that would allow us to get there. And in this way, every group within the organization can choose their own path to reach that goal. We don't have all to walk the same path, but everybody can walk their own path. And if that is happening because they are not focusing on KPIs that someone put on the way for them, but they are measuring themselves incrementally in terms of achieving and fulfilling the strategy, very likely, or more likely than in the previous case, they will be able to spot business opportunity which are off their path, but they can collect them if they have the freedom and the autonomy to decide how to move forward. Yeah? So if we focus on creating more coherence, and what we need at this level here in terms of culture is coherence, and the reason is simple. As Ben mentioned before, what makes your organization fast is the amount of decision and the quality of decision that you can produce in a certain period of time. And if those decisions are based on the beliefs we created in our organization, and those beliefs are not coherent, means we have people believing quality is better than quantity, and the other way around on the other side, guess what happens when you throw a problem on the table? If the guys with quantity picks it, does some decision and act in a certain way. If the guys with the quality picks it, does different thing and act in a different way. So you will have a lot of rework and a lot of waste if that is happening. So it becomes more and more vital, the idea and the understanding that we should focus on our culture and try to do everything we can to keep that culture as coherent and as transparent as possible. Because if that happens, we create an autonomous workforce which is aware of our values, of our principle, of the story of success and failure which brought us where we are today. And based on those things, they very likely make decisions which make sense. Even if they will all be different decisions, they are very likely coherently moving in the same direction. And in this way, we are definitely more resilient in terms of something new happen and someone will be able to pick it up and move in that direction with a higher level of autonomy, which in principle means we need to find a new language to describe organization and shift away from the idea of the organization as a machine, which is perfectly tuned and optimized to deliver a specific purpose. And it does it very effectively. It gets requirements in from the market. It delivers consistent solutions and product on the other side. This is the dream of everybody. And you know why? Because human beings are really cool. We are the only species on Earth which is able to abstract concepts, simplify them, create a metaphor with which we can explain it to other people, and that made us more successful than any other species on the planet. Because we can tackle complex problems because we simplify them with metaphors that we use to explain others how to do work. The problem is sometimes we get entangled in those metaphors and we oversimplify the problem we are trying to solve, and that doesn't work anymore. And so if the market is very volatile and we build a machine which is perfectly efficient on one side, as long as what we get as an input doesn't change, life is good. We can optimize, refine, and everything. But what if what we get as input start to change, and we need to continuously change that machine because the original one doesn't deliver anymore? It becomes an enormous effort. And there are many organizations today on the market which realize is a kind of imploding spiral, because the time it takes them to reorganize is longer than the time it takes to the market goals to shift. And so if that is the case and your organization doesn't learn fast enough, then you are inevitably going to succumb to market changes. And what do large organizations do? They buy smaller companies. Because the way I can cope with my incapability of innovate, because of the way I'm structured, I keep my existing organization milking the cow which gives me now money, and I buy a smaller startup somewhere else who is very good at doing something new that I need to do someday. And I can do that 2, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, but then inevitably at some point, I have a group of small companies which needs to kind of create some synergy with what I've built so far, but they have completely different culture with one another. Yeah? I don't know how many of you had the experience of being through a merging with another organization and having to work with colleagues who don't know how we do things around here, and they don't know. And we don't know how they used to do the things before. It's an extremely traumatic and not fun experience, yeah? Because everybody makes assumptions. It's obvious you would do that, but you don't, because in your culture that is not obvious. And so the idea of making it explicit and shift toward a more organic approach to designing and thinking about organizations, which allow us to focus more of effectiveness rather than efficiency, which means we need to create more autonomy and possibility for all the people in our organization to do different things, because we need different things. We need diversity. If everybody is the same in our company, then innovation dies. They just become a bunch of minions executing whatever work we have to do, but nobody anymore thinks out of the box. And until we want to grow and we want to ramp up in that growing market phase in the early majority, we still need diversity. We need people who are able to see those weak signals on the market, catch them up, and transform them into value for our client. And all of this only works if we are able to create autonomy on one side, and autonomy comes at a price, because if we have autonomy on one side, means we need to give up control on the other. It doesn't come for free. You can't have an autonomous, self-organizing team which is controlled by a manager. That is not working, right? So how do we keep governance? How do we keep consistency within the organization if we don't want to push for control? We switch our control from resource and time planning, which is what many do. We switch that to flow management. And flow is just about enabling people to make decisions, enabling them to make experiments, enabling them to make mistakes as long as they learn from them, because then the organization learns faster what's need to be done and how to do it. So in all this year that we spend working with organization, and we work in 13, 14 different countries, we calculated actually we had the projects in 42 different countries at some point in time. And that allows us to experience different culture in terms of nationality, but also on how people do things. Because we work with companies in all market branches, from pharmaceutical to banks to system engineering to many startups in software, but not only. And we learn to appreciate all differences in culture that we have seen. So we came to talk and create a framework which allows us to help organizations grow, which is what we call organic agility. And organic agility, in a nutshell, is a novel approach, is a new approach which is based on complexity science, and is basically a way to increase organizational resilience by providing a strong new leadership approach, which is based on situational leadership, is based on context understanding, is based on culture understanding, providing a set of principles how to grow the organization, which act more as a scaffolding, so you can throw them away once you build your own way of being resilient. You don't have to marry those values and principles and keep them forever, which is a little bit, in my opinion, one of the mistakes that the Agile Manifesto produced in our industry today, that either you are agile or not, so it becomes a religion. So either you are, one that belongs to that clan, or you aren't. And this is a little bit not what was the original intention of the whole thing, but is also a sign that Agile itself reaches the late majority in the market. It's not anymore something new. If you are considering now to become or to adopt any Agile practice or method in your organization, you are already in the late majority, because everybody in IT since 2000 is probably doing that already in any form. And it's personalized to your own need. And so the idea of creating organizational design principle, which tells me how should I change my organization, how should the leadership support that organizational change, and how does the leadership shape the culture with which I want to work, is all something which can be measured and controlled through tools. And tools is the third element of organic agility. And the idea of leadership is that we want to switch to an organization where leadership is a capability, is not anymore the name of a person or a role in our organization or a group of people, but is something that our organization can do. because then growing is easier. We don't have to look desperately on the market for super talented leader, which needs to come from somewhere. And again, they come in with a completely different culture, so we take them also time to understand how we tick and how to contribute to the organization. And every one of those guys will bring a new idea. Awesome, will increase diversity, but at the same time will slow us down. Instead of that, we want to have leadership as a capability, and the idea in organic agility is that leadership models, which are today on the market, are unfortunately all of them, most of them, outdated. There's very small group of leadership approaches which are called complexity leadership models, which are a little bit up to date with the knowledge era in which we are living today. Because most of the existing leadership models are based on industrial era assumption that there is a hierarchy, there is a structure, there are roles, there are responsibilities which are split between individuals, and is based on the underlying assumption of Mr. Friedrich Taylor, which in 1911 wrote the Scientific Management Treaty and decided that there were semi-skilled employees which needed to be directed by a manager, because in that way we would save money. If we were to hire only experienced people, we would have a much higher cost of delivery, and so with the manager we can actually save money, because the manager can coordinate 8 to 10 different people, which cost much less money, because the activity they have to perform are mechanical and repeatable, and only to the extent that the machine can't do it. But in the knowledge era, we all know people need to be mobile, they need all to think, they need all to be able to bring their idea forward. They don't need coordinators anymore, they need enablers. And so we need to look at a completely different type of leadership, not a leadership that controls based on the situation, but a leadership which understands culture, which understands context and situation, and the leadership which understands that behaviors are what can shape the culture as well. And so an approach to leadership which is about teaching everybody in the organization, and I really empathize with what Ben was saying this morning about you can't delegate things to your employee if you don't teach them how to do them. You want to delegate responsibility, not task. Because if you delegate task only, you remain the bottleneck. They will do things, they will bring artifacts back to you, and you are in charge to define and to bring them together again and create the value. So you are not speeding up, you are becoming the bottleneck, and your life will be miserable. And remember, as founders and entrepreneurs, you are the value in your company. Yeah? And if you get burned out or you get overused and entangled in a million of operational details, you stop thinking about your business. You stop thinking about what makes us unique and what will make us grow. So what are the organic agility principles? Very quickly, the first one is increase cultural awareness and coherence. We learn culture is important, is the bottom of the pyramid, shapes the beliefs which drives decision in our employee, and those decisions create the action which produce result. So we need to focus on our culture, make it explicit, and try to work through leadership in making it more and more coherent over time. So that when we change direction and we drop a message in our organization, everyone will likely understand it in a similar way and start moving in a common direction. Which is one of the biggest problems that traditional or old organizations have nowadays, because they optimize and define themselves based on structure. Every time a change management program is initiated within a large organization, because the culture is fragmented and is not aligned, it's a bloodbath. There's a lot of coordination. Everybody in the company doesn't understand exactly what it is about, even though leader and managers keeps on presenting and sending slides around and telling everybody this is what we need to do and how we need to do it. The problem is, if my culture and my value system is I value quality over quantity, I only read what is interesting to me. And if I'm on the other side and I only look at quantity over quality, I only read what is interesting to me, and are two different things. And repeating and telling more and more the same story doesn't help at all. We need to live those experiences with the people. So the best way to live strategy is to make culture part of your strategy and leverage the cultural, natural disposition of your people to actually achieve business goals over time. Then deciding based on context is also very important, because allow us to create a system for decision making in our organization which we can teach to people and allow them to understand that there is no silver bullet, there is no single way you can make decision, but there are ways in which we can understand the context, make the situational analysis, and come up with a good approach to make decision. If we teach that to every employee, even though they will still make different decisions than what we would make, at least we have created a certain coherence and consistency in the way decisions are made on a daily basis. And that is a big advantage when you need to grow fast. The third principle is focusing on value creation, which is something that as startup we always have to keep in mind. We often assume, because we work well with early adopters, that we know what the market needs. And we stop going and checking. And that is one of the biggest mistakes that many startups do when they go in the growth phase and they start the early majority. They stop going to the market, listening to customer, and understanding what is that they need and how to build it. And that is a big problem that can slow down. So focusing on value creation has two aspects. Number one, understand and validate what is the value. And number two, understand and validate how can we, as an organization, deliver that value as effectively as possible. Because if we fail to do that, we fail the options to be the first mover when it comes to grow the market and losing rapidly market share against our competition. The fourth one is validating change in smaller increments, which means connecting again to what Ben was saying this morning. You don't make a single change without having validated it before, which means you need to run experiments. You need to try things out before throwing problems or changes to your whole organization. And the reason for this is very important. If we do big changes few times over the year, the overhead in learning and the overhead in moving on from an old system of work to a new system of work will cost you more and more effectivity. Because people need to learn a new system, because there is a certain amount of inventory that they produce which needs to be handed over to someone else, because now we have a new role, we have a new process or whatever, and this takes longer and longer. So a better way to do it is to continuously run multiple parallel experiments, learn from each of them what makes us more successful, what puts us in a better condition than where we are today, and using that as a leverage to basically immediately scale and roll out that little piece of learning to the whole organization. So the learning of a group of people, of volunteers possibly, who believes that an hypothesis can be validated and we bring more value to your organization, becomes the learning of the whole organization. But you have to do it continuously. And the good thing about it is that if you do it continuously, change becomes the norm. And the mindset of your people will be more inclined when something unexpected happens just to take action and try to do the best out of it, rather than going belly up and ends up and saying, no, I don't know what to do, it's not my problem. Yeah? And that's a very, very subtle or nice byproduct if you want. Last but not least, when it comes to delivery, then we need to optimize the value flow. And that makes total sense, especially when you are in the late majority of a market. It means you already grow your business, you have your market share, you start making significant profit without having to invest too much anymore in that specific product, but you can invest those money and start the next thing. Because unless your strategies, I want to exit very quickly, which with the volatility of the market we have today, can work, but how much is that value of exiting if the business is done in 5 years? As opposed to, I want to keep on growing and get financement to grow, or I want to go IPO, in which case I need to have a nice portfolio of products and services. I cannot go with a single good idea. It's too risky, right? Look at Uber. Uber is not doing very well lately, and is going worse and worse because all governments are putting in place rules which don't allow private drivers to carry people anymore. All the insurance are rising prices because if accident happen and there is a non-professional driver driving someone around, it's a big problem. In Europe, there is a massive resistance to introduction of Uber, even if the minister now decided it's okay as long as you have a professional driving license, you don't need to be a taxi driver. But there's a lot of complication emerging on that, right? And there is no single value proposition. what Uber does can be copied by anybody, and you see already how many copycats are out there, but also any taxi company in Berlin or in any other city in Europe actually created an app in the last 2 years, and you can do exactly the same things with taxi that you could only do with Uber 2 years ago. So there's a lot of things which we need to take in account when we look at growing our business. Last but not least, a couple of information about how can we measure real time what is going on in our organization. And we develop a couple of tools which also has 3 or 4 patents registered already. One is what we call the OR scan. It's an organizational scan which allows us to track decision-making processes in the company. And based on those decision-making processes, we can actually shape and design or measure what is the culture within the organization. And also look where are the bottlenecks in decision-making and helping decision-maker, leader, or employees within an organization to adapt their processes. Also, we can connect those decision-making processes to the strategy of the organization and create a real-time feedback loop on how people feel about decisions which have been made on a strategic or operational level, how do they feel about the decision, the effectiveness of that decision, and particularly what can they do next to intervene and participate into the strategy. So the strategy becomes a living artifact, doesn't become something you hang on the wall that everybody look from once in a while to see, oh, that is what we are supposed to do, but we aren't. Thank you very much for this 45 minutes. Or everybody's still sleeping. No questions? Wait for the mic so that everybody can hear it. Thank you.
It was very interesting. Thank you very much. I just stumbled a little bit across the picture of the tree you showed for the organic agile approach, because the tree stands for me like for something that grows over like 70 years. Do you have another picture? Because if I would transport that into my organization, they always say, yeah, of course. I mean, you just can wait a year for the next millimeter of growth. Then.
Yeah, thanks for the question. You know, the tree is a good image for organic growth. And the good thing about the tree is that if the tree burns, but the roots are safe, which are your values and principles, you can grow again in a completely different way. So you are not dying. That's a good thing. A better metaphor, if you want, are you familiar with slime mold? You know what slime mold is? It's an ugly thing, but it's a very resilient organic thing. So slime mold is basically slime, which becomes a vegetable when it reaches an area in the bushes where there is enough nutrition to grow and replicate very quickly, like musk do. When the nutrition goes away, it reduces itself again, becomes an animal, and moves to a place where there is food again. It's one of the most resilient beings on the earth, but is ugly, and you cannot use slime mold for marketing. I tried once, but believe me, my marketing guys kicked me out of the door immediately, so it didn't work. Any other question? Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Ben.